D.E. Vacordagalir, my name is James Nagle, welcome to The Irish Nation Lives. Edward de Valera was born on the 14th of October 1882 in New York City. His mother, Catherine Call, had immigrated from Ireland in 1879 and worked as a servant, but practically nothing is known of his father Vivian. The story that Catherine told is that her husband became ill in late 1884 and travelled west to seek medical treatment, but died on the journey. Searches of various archives have failed to turn up even a marriage certificate for Catherine, and there have always been questions hanging over de Valera's parentage. In April 1885, Catherine sent her young son to Ireland to live with his grandmother Elizabeth Call in Brewery, County Limerick. Without his parents or relatives near his own age, de Valera spent much of his childhood alone. He attended the local primary school until he was 14, when he switched to the Christian Brothers School in Charleville. Self-confident and competitive, in 1898 he performed well enough in his exams to qualify for an exhibition, a financial prize which allowed him to enter Blackrock College in Dublin. It was here that his love of maths began to develop, and he earned a reputation for being serious and studious. He graduated from University College Dublin with a degree in mathematical sciences in 1904 and secured a position as Professor of Mathematics at a Sister of Mercy Teacher Training College in 1906. Following the establishment of the National University of Ireland in 1908, the Gaelic League started a nationwide campaign to have Irish added as a compulsory subject for entrance exams. In his youth, de Valera and his uncle Pat had tried to learn Irish but had given up. However, if he wished to keep teaching, knowledge of the language would now be essential. He started to attend beginners' classes in October of 1908 and soon after joined the Gaelic League itself, volunteering for jobs that no one else wanted, making him indispensable within the organisation. Here also he met Sinead Flanagan, and they married in 1910, although she was a member of Inini Nahéireann, the predecessor of Cumann na mBan. De Valera himself was, at this time, largely disinterested in politics. This changed in 1913 at the height of the Home Rule crisis. Ulster Unionists had established the Ulster Volunteers and were threatening to form a provisional government to resist the introduction of Home Rule. In response to this, on the 25th of November, Owen McNeill held a meeting at the Rotunda in Dublin to form the Irish Volunteers, and de Valera was one of the first to join up. He was soon elected by his peers as a second lieutenant, and in May of 1913 was made a captain in the 3rd Dublin Battalion. He was described as serious, but also aloof, and was viewed as a natural authority figure. On the 10th of March 1915, de Valera was appointed to the rank of Commandant of the 3rd Battalion, and a few days later he was informed for the first time that plans were being made for a rising in Dublin. That August he was part of the 50-strong committee that organised the funeral of the O'Donovan Rossa, a sign of his growing importance. The 1916 rising catapulted Éamon de Valera from a political unknown to one of the most prominent members of the Republican movement. De Valera's 3rd Battalion was to have responsibility for the Boland's Bakery area, cutting off troop movement into the city centre from Dunleary. His men turned out in force on Easter Sunday, but due to the confusion around the countermanding order, only 120 or so mobilised the following day. On Wednesday the 26th, British soldiers of the 59th Division arrived in Dunleary and attempted to cross Mount Street Bridge into the city centre. Here they came under heavy fire from a handful of men under the command of Lieutenant Michael Malone of the 3rd Battalion. Throughout the Battle of Mount Street Bridge, 17 volunteers inflicted between 150 and 200 casualties on the British, including 30 killed. De Valera played no part in the battle due to its isolation from his headquarters, but this didn't stop him from receiving most of the credit. For example, in his biography written many years later, London-born Irish volunteer Joe Good, who held de Valera to be responsible for the Civil War, described stories of him personally commanding the defenders, telling them, due to a lack of ammunition, to hold their fire until they could see the whites of the enemy's eyes. The Battle of Mount Street Bridge, and his mistaken association with it, created for de Valera a reputation as the most successful military leader of the 1916 Rising. On Saturday the 29th of April, Patrick Pearse signed an unconditional surrender. Due to the isolation of de Valera's position, news of this didn't reach him until Sunday morning, and it was 1 o'clock before he surrendered. He and his men were held for 2 days at the Royal Dublin Society before being marched to Richmond Prison on the 2nd of May. It was the 8th of May before de Valera was court-martialled and sentenced to death. By this time, 12 men had been shot, and public opinion had turned drastically against the British government. Herbert Asquith called on General Sir John Maxwell to bring the executions to an end, but agreed it would be wrong to exclude James Connolly and Sean McDermott, considering the other signatories of the proclamation had been shot. They were court-martialled the day after De Valera and executed on the 12th of May. Some claim that De Valera's American citizenship saved him from execution, but this is unlikely. Tom Clark was a naturalised US citizen and one of the first to be executed, and there was difficulty at the time in proving De Valera's entitlement to US citizenship due to a lack of documentation surrounding his father. In total, over 90 rebels were sentenced to death, with rumours that the figure would have gone higher if Maxwell had been allowed to continue. De Valera seems to have been saved purely by luck. He arrived late at Richmond Barracks, was court-martialled as pressure was being put on the military to stop the executions, and wasn't important enough in the eyes of the British for an exception to be made. De Valera's death sentence was commuted to life in prison, and he was deported to England. At Lewes Prison, he was elected as commandant of the imprisoned rebels, and in May of 1917 he, Thomas Ashe and Tom Hunter led a strike demanding POW status. De Valera was removed to Maidstone Prison, but in June of 1917 all remaining prisoners were released due to US entry into the First World War and the upcoming Irish Convention. In light of his 1916 record and his leadership of the prisoners, De Valera was nominated to contest the East Clare by-election, called following the death of Major Willie Redmond at the Battle of Messines. De Valera campaigned in uniform, flanked by the Irish Volunteers, and surrounded himself with Catholic clergy. He was able to run a campaign that appealed both to hardline Republicans and moderate nationalists. He won the election on the 10th of July 1917 with a margin of 2-1 and would represent the area for the next 42 years. When the Sinn Féin Ard Fheis met on the 25th and 26th of October 1917, De Valera was elected president, unopposed, as a compromise candidate. To bring together those like Arthur Griffith, who favoured a dual monarchy, and the hardline Republicans represented by Cathal Brugha, De Valera had put forward a policy that Ireland would seek international recognition of the Irish Republic from the major powers at the post-war peace conference, after which the Irish people would be allowed to choose their own form of government and relationship with Britain. The day after the Ard Fheis ended, De Valera was elected, again unopposed, as president of the Irish Volunteers. In early 1918, in response to heavy Allied losses on the Western Front during the German Spring Offensive, the British government moved to introduce conscription to Ireland. De Valera took a leading role in Sinn Féin's resistance campaign and became public enemy number one in the eyes of the British establishment. In May, believing that the removal of the Sinn Féin leadership would collapse resistance to conscription, a number of nationalist leaders were arrested, including De Valera, and deported to Britain. De Valera was still behind bars when he was elected in 2 constituencies during the 1918 general election, and as Dáil Éireann opened on the 21st of January 1919, Michael Collins and Harry Boland were travelling to England to break him out of Lincoln Jail. On his return to Ireland, he was elected president of Dáil Éireann, and in June he travelled to the United States, determined to gain international recognition of the Irish Republic. His willingness to become involved with organisational work saw De Valera rise quickly through the ranks of the Gaelic League, the Irish Volunteers, and then Sinn Féin. Tall, serious, and well educated, he was considered by many as a natural authority figure. While De Valera painted himself as a reluctant leader, taking charge of the prisoners at Lewes and later serving as president of the Dáil only because he was called on to do so, he guarded power jealously, delegated little, and used threats of resignation to force through his decisions. He is often described as authoritarian and difficult to deal with, but it is clear that those who followed him loved him and were devoted to him. Even those who would become his most bitter enemies would admit a begrudging respect for him. De Valera stands as one of the most controversial and complex figures in Irish history. More so than any other figure in the Irish Revolution, his actions will be discussed and debated in depth in the years ahead, and he'll feature prominently in many future episodes here on The Irish Nation Lives. I'll be looking at the lives of many of the other important figures in the events of 100 years ago, so make sure to subscribe to be kept up to date and check out the Twitter and other social media accounts. Links are in the description. Accordia, thank you for joining me on The Irish Nation Lives. Slán go fóill.